back to this week's episode of AMA Friday with Amy Miller, recruiting in yoga pants. So this week, I want to walk you through the typical life cycle of opening a requisition or an open position or a job posting, as you may know it. I think there's a lot of confusion about this, and I will, of course, add that giant asterisk that different companies are going to have different processes, okay? Not every company is going to be as involved as what I'm going to share with you today. Not every company is going to be as strict as far as the rules or approval processes, things like that. This is generally, though, what I've seen more or less in small companies, definitely large companies. Even as an agency recruiter, there were still certain things that had to be checked in the employer company, right? There were certain boxes that had to be checked. There's budgets for full-time employees, contract employees. That's typically a different bucket. We'll talk more about contract versus full-time in a future video, if that's something that would be helpful for you. But I thought I would start by just setting the groundwork of how a requisition is approved. So what goes into the actual creation of a search, of an open role that we need to go and hire for. So again, take all of this with a giant grain of salt, but I think most recruiters and HR and hiring managers will back me up on this, that more often than not, this is the process, or at least there is a process when it comes to opening a role. So it starts, there's a couple things that happen somewhat in tandem. So the first step is we are determining budget and need. So budget versus need. So what I mean by budget, usually twice a year, sometimes it's annually, sometimes it's more often, but usually once to twice a year, leadership is looking at their hiring budget. This is sometimes a dollar amount. This is sometimes a number of open roles. This is, it depends on the organization. I've seen it done both ways, but generally speaking, leadership and finance and all the people who are in charge of that kind of stuff are going to say, you get to hire 200 heads. So, hey, VP, your business group is getting 200 heads or $10 million or whatever it is, right? Depending on how they determine their budget. Based on those numbers, we now start determining what are the needs. So if I'm a VP and my group is now going to get 200 heads and I've got seven leaders underneath me, add a couple more here. So that's 5, 6, 7. So there's my 7 leaders. And I've got to divide my 200 heads across these groups. So I'm going to start doing a needs assessment. I'm going to ask my leaders, tell me what it is that you have forecasted this year. How many people do you need to add to your team to achieve whatever the goal is? How many people do you think we might lose through attrition? Who are we planning to promote? So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes in this very early stage. We haven't even talked about job descriptions or any of that stuff yet. We're simply deciding how much headcount am I going to get and how am I distributing that across my group. So that's now going to lead to my hiring goal. This is often where your recruiter, your internal corporate recruiter or your HR partner is now getting involved, okay? So now they're saying, okay, you have a hiring goal. So this group, let's say Director A, is gonna get 46 heads this year, okay? So I now have this goal. I'm making up numbers here, but bear with me. So let's say I have this hiring goal, 46 heads. Now I'm going to look at where are the gaps in my team. So I'm kind of, again, going back to this needs analysis here and figuring out, of these 46 heads that I'm getting, how many of them need to be allocated to university hiring? How many are going to be allocated to senior leadership or management type roles? How many are going to be allocated to actual new added headcount that I've determined I need to meet whatever the next goal is for my group, my next milestone or whatever. So then I have a hiring goal. Now I've determined my hiring goal. I've kind of figured out where are my gaps today, what are the open positions I need to do to fill right now, and I'm going to start opening roles. So I'm going to open a role. And so again, sometimes these are very proactive. I know I'm going to need to add X number of people in A, B, and C verticals. Let's start opening roles and start building those pipelines. There's also the more reactive, holy crap, somebody critical just resigned, I now need to backfill. So that can also sometimes come out of this headcount, but often that is what we refer to as a backfill hire. So we're using that same existing headcount to create a role to replace a person who's left. So we're talking two different buckets. We're talking about my budgeted headcount that I got awarded newly, or we're talking about my backfill where I'm using that same position that was already created and already existed and maybe was approved 3 or 4 years ago to open this new role and create this new hire. So those are the two questions that we have when we open a role. Is this actually a net new position, or is this a backfill? Okay. We need to know that. A lot of times people think, well, you're asking that because you want to know why the person left, or, what are we trying to replace? Yeah, those are also important questions and distinctions that we should be talking through, but it also has a lot to do with the budget. Is this coming out of the general hiring pool, or is this an already existing headcount that we have permission to fill? Okay, so that now I've determined that I have a budget, I have my headcount need, I know what my hiring goal is, and now I can start talking specifically about roles. We haven't posted a job yet, y'all. Did you catch that? We're still in the very early stages here. So now that I've done all that, now I'm going to open a role. So now I've got my approved headcount, and I'm sitting down with my recruiter, and I'm saying, okay, I need a person to do all these things. And so everywhere I've personally worked, hiring managers are responsible for writing their own job descriptions. This is good and bad. This is good because, frankly, the hiring manager is the one that should know what they want. They should know these are the requirements, and here's why I need these things. Here's what I can live without. Here's what's really nice to have. So going back to those basic qualifications and preferred qualifications, we are leaning heavily on their input, but we are also, from the recruiting side, trying to influence what's reasonable, and thinking about, like, if you have something like, must come from a top tier school, I don't love that. I will never, it won't get past me. Believe me, it will be because I was literally overridden before you ever see that in one of my job descriptions, because I don't love that personally. In fact, I'm a big fan of or equivalent experience next to a degree requirement, because some of us don't have degrees and we're still really good at our jobs. So things like that. So we want to try to influence and nudge and kind of push our leaders to being very thoughtful and removing as much bias as possible when creating that role. So let's say we've created the role now, right? We've established the budget, we have the headcount to spend or the backfill to create, we have the permission to open a role, we've now worked on our job description, we've got it exactly how we want it. Guess what? Now it goes to the approval chain. And let me tell you, that can be lengthy. So you will typically have the first approver, who might be the recruiter. So again, the recruiter is kind of taking that second look and saying, okay, yeah, I'm okay with these qualifications. I think we're okay to require these specific things. I've done some labor market research. I think this is reasonable, or hey, this is going to be really hard to find, but if it means that much to you, whatever. So we're having those conversations. The second layer is usually a business approver. And this is often the hiring manager's boss, the overall leader, for the hiring manager's team. And maybe it's a VP, maybe it's someone. It just depends on the organization. But there's typically kind of that second layer on the business side that has to go in and hit a button or send an email or otherwise confirm, yeah, we're okay to spend the headcount here. Okay. So this is more of a job description approval. This is an actual, yeah, you can use this headcount approval. Then we're going to have finance. Okay? Keep in mind, finance is part of that original discussion about the number of headcount you're going to get. Finance needs to know when these roles are opening because they're keeping track. Okay? They're starting from maybe a very large number and hey, this is what we've overall approved. Every one of these roles that gets opened is removed from that master list. You don't want to run out, y'all, because if you do, finance is going to say no. Okay, so that's super important. And then sometimes we might have legal. Okay, if you're an OFCCP compliant company, if you're a startup who's just kind of newly starting to build out this functionality, you probably need someone to sanity check this. And so legal is usually kind of that check and balance to say, okay, yeah, you've included the proper EEOC verbiage, or you're not using certain terms we shouldn't use, or code words, or things like that. So legal is kind of that final, check the box, make sure we're staying out of compliance jail kind of approvers. And then sometimes you may also have recruiting leadership approval. So I know in my case, I actually do have, my boss has to approve all the recs that we post. So we go through the whole chain of command. We have finance involved. We have all these people that get to say, yes or no to these things. And my boss is kind of the final one to just make sure every other box is checked. So this is all happening, y'all, before we even get to post the role. So I want you to understand that recs, for the most part, or open positions for the most part, are not taken lightly. We're not, or we shouldn't be, I should say, we shouldn't be just kind of throwing out random job descriptions and seeing what sticks. This should be a very methodical and thoughtful approach to headcount planning and determining the right skills needed to achieve the goals of the business. All right. So I hope that helps y'all. Went a little bit over, but I think it's really important as we talk about applying to roles and thinking about the best way to show up in front of hiring managers, all those kinds of things. I think it's super, super critical that we take into context or take into account what it takes to open a role, because this is not just a random throw a job post out there and hope it sticks process. All right. Questions, comments, let me know down below. Always happy to dig into any of these particular areas that we covered or answer any questions you might have. So more to come next week. We'll dig into contracting versus FTE hiring, but just keep in mind, there's an approval process for both. See you next week.